Hello and welcome back to class. Here we will import an image from our project. It's been a minute since I started drawing things for the project. I drew a couple of enemies here. I spent just a couple of minutes on it. And then this spriting tool, this pixelapp.com, pixelapp.com, where you can divide up your sprite sheets for just a regular image or some other tool. Also, you can erase the background if you need so for your particular game project. Here we are going to cut up the sprite sheets and take a look at some of the animations for the character here. We can also slow down the images here for the character. This was a 32 pixel character which I rescaled, which is, I have to fix and correct it and make it a little better later. At least for right now, we can look at what this animation could do as an enemy source for the characters in the game that we're working on. There's a lot of other information online, other free websites that you can look at other game projects for SDL. itch.io has a lot of work there. Anyway, in our game project, last time we used the terminal, the Vim editor to look at some of the source. Since then, we tried to implement some of the functions. Let's look at some of the functions and work for our Marvel FanGame that we're working on, at least for right now. And let's look at some of the code for the project that we are working on at the present moment. Alright, so I changed the files types for the project from a C files to the H files, the header files to HPP files to match the CPP files. This really won't change the code much. We're now using a C++ implementation as opposed to using the C implementation headers. It really depends on your compiler. This really won't affect your coding much. Alright, for the first file I altered was some of the constant files for the game. We're working on a platformer, I guess. You put a hash in front of them to make defines. If you want to load in the a sound effect or some of the music files, I use a variable here. Also, you can declare the size of the screen and width and height, or if you had something for gravity and what have you for your projects. Also, I went over to the game.cpp file and I edited the work here for the editor. So I'm loading this up in Vim so we can take a look at it a little better than the other files. All right, so I did nothing for the constructor or the deconstructor variables here. I tried to do some implementation with the window, so we use the SDL create window function. We named the game here Spider-Man and the Uncanny X-Men. We defined the position of the window using SDL position undefined, and you can also use SDL position centered. And I probably need to do this a little better. I use the define files for whatever. Anyway, back to the SDL chunk. You need to have a file. You need a variable to hold using SDL chunk, SDL mix chunk, and SDL mix music. You need a pointer for each one of those objects you were using to store the music as. Since their pointers need to be turned set to null. We initialized SDL to the PNG library. Also here we use some quick error checking to check to see if the music files were. You can also we'll move this around later. You need to know that the music channel is playing or the music that you're using, and there's also the state of playing needs to be manipulated. Moving right along to resources, if you're loading in music files and using the Simple Directmedia Layer, you need to make sure that the file can be loaded. So this is a C++ implementation strategy for doing error logging. SDL has its own error logging information for your projects. Alright, so we're missing something here in initialization. Here, last time we initialized the Simple Directmedia Layer library. Also, we need to initialize the music library here, or maybe the next video we'll talk about that. initialize the music library, and also initializing the TTF library, the true text fonts for our game project. But we'll talk about some of the other structuring in the game projects. Alright, so if we're loading in font using the Simple Directmedia Layer's extension library for font, you need to define the size of the font. Here, the size of the font was 24. You can also define the color of the font and the actual message used for the font. You have to use a SDL for the TTL font library pointer for the font, and use TTF open font to access the font, and wherever you store the font will be loaded there. Also, that font that you store to the screen has to have a texture to put the font on, as we talked about in my video series on SDL, available down below in the description. Alright, so we have the game loop going here for the game project. It's not really implemented. This is a typical implementation for your loading your textures using the PNG library, or this is one of those BMP images. To do this, you will have to have a SDL surface call of some type, and use the SDL BMP format to load in the files. What you'll do after that is convert the SDL, take the SDL texture from surface. That requires the renderer and that surface you used. And then, you have some error checking here to test that this is just, you can copy paste this offline somewhere. I'm sure you can find this structure in somewhere. Here for the inside the input actions functions, as we talked about before, you have to probably reference the event. We have to use a control structure in here. You may find this code somewhere. This is from someone else's implementation here for that. But anyway, you have to you can use the event types, and here use for beyond the SDL quit, we're checking for the case of the SDL quit. This will close the window. But for a key down and a key up, you have to check for each type of case. So they use the event, the dot operator, key, the key system, and scan code. For each particular button, you need to change the variable that controls the state of the button press. When I press the space bar, player jumps. Also, if I press a certain button like A or left or right, it also needs to be able to change the button. Alright, for jumping mechanics for the platformer of any other platformer, this is what most people would do. You'd have to jump lock the player. Alright, you have to check for the condition of jumping as a player. Also, you need to move the player in that particular state here. Alright, so for drawing the tile map for the player, you need to define the files and what have you. I didn't really load in the files, but inside the project directory, I made a danger room file, as you'll look at in a moment, in a bit when we talk about texture map and loading texture maps. I just gave it a rectangle, and then 1 was the wall and 0 was the ground, and then the player, we would put the player somewhere inside of here for the screen or width, what have you, for the game project. Alright, back to the terminal. Alright, so we also, to show information on the screen SDL, if you're going to draw the player or draw the whatever you put it on the screen, or the score or what have you, we implemented this draw score function. Of course, we have to have the true text font library implemented in SDL, and we have to have the related information where we store the information to on screen. This is not tentative. This is just what we're working on for now. And of course, if we're turning off the image library we talked about before, for those for mixed chunk and for the WAV files, music files that we close. Also, you need to close the audio. Maybe this should probably be in a different place. The next time we go into this, we'll look at it a bit further and see can we get something working in our projects for the Simple Directmedia Layer.